Simone, hello, welcome to Calabria, welcome to the Hospitality Summit, the 4th edition. This year we're here in Lamezia Terme, once again at the T Hotel. You have been a frequent and welcome guest here for many years now, all thanks to the hard work of Bruno and the entire team responsible for organizing this wonderful event. So let me welcome you back once again to the beautiful region of Calabria. I remember you from the very first edition. If I'm not mistaken, you were there too, right?
I think I only missed one. Maybe I skipped just one edition.
Okay, so anyway.
You're
a daredevil from Calabria who talks about tourism and hospitality. And today, speaking of tourism and hospitality, Simone brings something that, even though it's often mentioned in 2026, many times people aren't really aware of what it means. What are you bringing? What is it that's inspiring you? And in any case, what are you bringing into your work as a teacher, but also as a professional, a trainer, and as a member of important organizations in the hospitality world? I mean, introduce yourself. And what are you contributing today with your input? Today, here as well, and especially here.
And I want to thank you so very much. I truly appreciate your usual hospitality as always. I have focused a lot, especially from an academic research perspective, on the relationship between humans and machines in a sector like ours, which is strongly anthropocentric, where the human touch is somewhat the central point of what we do. But it would also be naive to think that technologies like automation and artificial intelligence, everything that we let pass under that label, because this is also a semantic melting pot, doesn't have an impact on our sector just because our sector is so human-centered. And so my reflections basically start from this kind of relationship between technology and humans in a sector that is historically, traditionally, strongly human to human.
Human to human. In your presentation, even here today with me, you mentioned a term that is very important to me, the integration between AI and humans. What does that mean to you today? And also in our future, which we haven't seen yet, the one that's about to arrive, the one that's already here but is still evolving. How will things change in the world of hospitality and tourism with this human plus AI approach?
Of course. Look, when I was in high school, I write that writing about the future also means being wrong about the future. Maybe it's mostly about being wrong about the future, especially in such a schizophrenic historical moment like this one, where new technologies are changing. On a daily basis, it's often very difficult to make predictions with the accuracy we had just 5 or 10 years ago. I would say that it's very, very, very complex. This adds a level of difficulty to our work, which has always been about trying to anticipate the times in order to understand what was coming. Then there's the hospitality of the future, or at least the near future. Today, this kind of exercise becomes very, very, very complex.
More complex. The word you hear more and more often is complexity. What does complexity mean to you? What is complexity for you at this moment?
But look, rather than complexity, I talk about a certain inscrutability, and it's not a new concept. On more than one occasion, I've said that I never like to use the term revolution when we talk about technology, even though it's a very specific term. It's often used in the AI field because in reality, there is no revolution, there is an evolution, certainly an accelerated one, but still it's an evolution. If we look at theorists of artificial intelligence, even from the 1990s, I think, I'm thinking of Bostrom, I'm thinking of Kurzweil. In truth, they had also predicted with very, very high accuracy what is happening today. However, in their predictions, especially in Kurzweil's words, there was already the vision of a technology that at some point would become inscrutable in some way. In other words, our ability to anticipate changes would diminish. And although we are not there yet, that is, we can still make at least some predictions, it is certainly very difficult. And this is where the complexity lies in creating plans that go beyond the immediate future. So today, even though this is my job, for 26 years, 27 years this year, today I feel much less at ease to suggest to my clients a technological implementation over the medium to long term, precisely because these technologies often become obsolete very quickly, and above all, because many of the standards are not yet well defined. So we could find ourselves in a paradoxical situation, the classic innovator's dilemma, where an organization decides to implement a certain technology, and then maybe a year later having to rebuild everything from scratch. This is the complexity.
There is definitely a need to implement it, but also on the other hand, we need to be careful not to focus on just one thing. As you said, maybe we shouldn't bet all our 100 euros or all our 100 chips on a single thing, because over time, especially in times like these, things can change quickly, and it's important to adapt to those changes. So we don't really know what the future holds, but today we can get a bit of a glimpse how things are evolving and try to move in that direction. And for this reason, I want to ask you a question that I really liked from your presentation that you sent me. The definition of techno-philosopher. How important is philosophy today in this context here?
Although I don't think it was the happiest way to open my course today, I said, look, if any of you leave this table and I've taught you something you can put into practice today, then I have failed. And I believe that if we are, deontologically speaking, our role is not to teach the operator how to install a chatbot or how to train a language model. And this is truly the last mile operationality that, as I repeat, is what we are facing. The overlap is enormous. What I explained today will be obsolete by the time we go to Google with Coffin. What matters to us today is to place it within a broader, more philosophical framework, which allows the operator to understand what is changing, the paradigm shift.
Paradigm shift.
The difference in how it is applied is irrelevant to us. Whether the application goes through one model or another, through one protocol or another, is ultimately a secondary issue.
And that thing, what you're saying is a secondary issue actually stems from doubt, from the benefit of the doubt that is always present. In philosophy, there is always an open question. Philosophy doesn't ask closed questions, it always asks open ones. And for this reason, I want to ask you an open question. What has always deeply struck me about your unique way of seeing the world, of truly seeing what is happening around us, is something that I also feel within myself. Because I too am certainly one of those people who focuses not just on how things work, but rather on the deeper reasons why we do what we do in our lives. For you, your why, not just for yourself, but your reason for doing what you do, what is it?
Besides masochism, you mean?
Besides masochism, because honestly, doing these kinds of jobs, no, it's torture sometimes because you always have to rethink the things we've already thought about. You always have to be there.
Yes, no, look, I actually think I find myself in a position that I think is interesting, at least by my standards, because it allows me to both to deal with a more hands-on aspect of things through more consulting work for clients, but also to somehow be able to understand things just a bit before others do. What will happen, and this is more the work I do on boards, as an advisor and so on. So I work with many companies with whom, of course, I have relationships that are not shares, NDAs, but if a company whose board I'm on is about to launch something that will have an impact, usually a few months or even a year before, I already know about it. And it's true that you can't talk about it, but it's also true that you know about it. So this gives you an advantage. So let's say, and in my opinion, this is extremely important, even though, as you may have understood, I am more drawn to the academic and philosophical research side. Maintaining a certain connection with what the impact of these technological introductions in hospitals actually means is definitely very, very important. Because I believe that one of the problems we have today is precisely a strong disconnect.
A strong disconnect?
What
do you mean by disconnect?
Between the discussion about technology and the discussion about hospitals. To the point that even the way you ask me questions is often dualistic. I've seen it also with the students from today's class, and they ask you, okay, but then will artificial intelligence replace the human touch? The question is poorly framed. We Westerners think in a dualistic way, right? There's this and there's that, and this is against that, right? Artificial versus natural, where natural is considered better than artificial. But in reality, even from a historical point of view, that's not correct. If you think about it, technology is not only human, but it's actually what makes us more human. That is, we find ourselves in this position at the top of the intellectual pyramid because 2.5 million years ago, we created choppers. We started to create the first technologies. The difference between our species and others is essentially tied only to the fact that we are the only species that has developed technology. And yet, in my opinion, we have a very romantic humanistic view of the world. And in academia, by its nature and tradition, this is obviously amplified. That technology is opposed to humanity. And this is not true. It is a relationship of coexistence, often a painful one, I understand that, but it is a relationship of coexistence. It is certainly not a relationship of duality.
Technology is what we mean by technology. Sometimes we think of it in terms of modern technologies, but the word technology itself, since you're a philosopher, explain it a bit better because I know what it means, but I want you to say it. The meaning of technology, and this discussion definitely ties back to what you've been telling me so far. What is technology?
I think that we are also very thick-skinned, very often. Thank you. We continue a certain philosophical line of thought, which is always kind of the philosophical curve, but also everything you've mentioned. Floridi off camera.
Exactly, that is absolutely right. And perfectly correct.
Certain philosophers as well. A bit more pop. Think of Galimberti, think of Gunther Anders. For example, he wrote what I think is one of the main texts on technology called The Obsolete Man, which he wrote 100 years ago. And for the philosopher Gunther Anders, technology was fundamentally Promethean. He argued that the human being does not simply discover fire out of nowhere. Instead, man takes this divine gift directly from the gods and then uses it to heat his food and transform his world. From this point of view, technology is a tool, it is an instrument. The philosophical perspective after the Second Industrial Revolution nevertheless emphasized the alienation caused by technology, so a more Marxist, more Andersian, more Heideggerian, even Floridian view within certain limits, and so on. And that's not wrong, but technology is not just that. The problem is not technology itself, which, as I repeat, is a tool. It is a
tool.
The problem is when we, and this is the central point, ask our human beings, especially workers, to act like robots, and then we ask our robots to act like human beings. So the mistake we make is not so much technological, but rather a matter of making the wrong choice. Where to implement technology? So I don't really care much. There's this story I often mention about a hotel in Japan that replaced its receptionists with androids. Obviously it didn't. This worked because the basic idea was wrong, flawed. I go and replace the human being in a position where instead the value of the human is very high, which is what is being spent. Whereas that kind of approach and technological application would have made much more sense, for example, in the underlying infrastructure. Here, everything the guest doesn't see, everything that frees up the human being. And so I believe that, sorry, I took the question in a way that wasn't recommended. It is my firm belief that it is not simply the existence of technology as a functional tool that empowers us to achieve our various goals. And quite often, it does indeed allow us to, the world is fundamentally anthropocentric in its relationship with technology. But in the end, it is the deliberate choices that we ultimately decide to make about where to implement technology. So it is not simply a question of what is being said. It is more a matter of subtle nuance and of detail.
But how exactly? Of how we want to put into practice what exists as technology.
I want to keep hugging my mother, but I have no problem with that. Imagine if it were a helpful robot assistant, constantly reminding my elderly mother to take her daily medication, just to keep her healthy and well, and...
Here we are now, opening a brand new and significant chapter in this story, where all of our precious human memories, both today and far into the future, will be completely possible to vividly recall and relive once again. Our precious memories, every single one of us possesses the inherent right to keep them, and at certain times to recall them. Once in the days of old, we used to recall them through vivid and detailed paintings, and through magnificent and timeless works of art, through sculptures. Now we are at the stage where all of this can be transformed, even, as you say, into robots. That too is an art form. It's a different kind of art because there's a different technology involved. Today, art is technology. Technology is art. Sometimes they are seen as separate. The artist is the technologist. Sometimes people see them as separate, but they are not.
Block it at the outset. Think of an artist whom I imagine we all recognize as an artist, one of the greatest artists of the last century, Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol was quite a character. He was so extreme that very often Andy Warhol would outsource his works to warehouses, to factories. That's why it was called the factory. None of us has ever questioned whether Andy Warhol was an artist or not. I want to stretch this argument even further. And we could think that art, in truth, is simply a creative, primitive process. I always say I could have a fantastic idea for a painting, think about it, and then go back to bed. And that alone would already be art. The way this art is brought to light for the public, to me, is ultimately secondary. Thank you. It is
the tool that we know very well how much it hurts. It hurts to feel like a part of all this because it sets so many other things in motion again. Doubts, limiting beliefs about technology that we still carry with us, electricity, which doesn't seem like something that saved our lives, the internet, which didn't save our lives, but rather it seems like it ruined us, the internet. We're talking about the internet, which has saved humanity since it came into existence.
It saved us. Look.
Exactly.
Anders said it best.
And it's a technology.
Absolutely. But Anders put it perfectly when he talks about this Promethean shame and says that the relationship between humans and technology, after a certain point, becomes asynchronous, because humans find themselves surpassed by their own technology. So the problem, once again, is a comparative one. I'll give you a simple example. If I ask you now, can you give me the square root of 1743.6? And you wouldn't be able to tell me. If I were to assess your intelligence based on your ability, or lack thereof, to give me this square root, then to me, you should be considered an idiot. I have no problem with that at all. If you take your phone and do it,
with the calculator.
So again, you see, it's a way in which we compare ourselves to technology.
Exactly. And
the way in which we, in some way, are human, all too human. To put it another way, it's where we project our own ideas and our vision of technology onto who we are.
Yeah.
Obviously, technology is never neutral. So for some people, above all, it should be perceived as a threat, but it is not inherently a threat.
All right then, that is fine, Simone. Have you actually brought along for us today, at least in my own personal opinion, a vision of what is needed today? The vision of technology, the vision of AI, the vision of humanity in all this, what is happening to leave us with a message and a hope. And of course, we should also mention your social media contacts, those specific places where people can follow your work and maybe even discuss these important things with you in the future. So tell us, where exactly can they find you online? To wrap things up, could you provide us with a detailed conclusion about your aspirations and hopes for the future? And let us know where people can get in touch and connect with you directly if they want to discuss a specific case with you in much more depth. It is an idea, an open conversation that has remained open for everyone.
Let's end on a less clear note. I was talking about it off camera. Last year, I formalized a thesis that I published in an academic journal and that is now being used. It has been accepted by the industry. This was the thesis of humans as lunch, the central thesis of this academic paper. For me, it started from a very human concept. That is, let's imagine a future in which a certain normalized relationship with the artificial becomes the norm. For example, where we can do an automatic check-in with a kiosk or a machine and so on. In this future, where even human interactions, especially transactional ones, can somehow be digitized, artificialized, automated, and so on. It will be the human being themselves who becomes a differentiator. And so in my thesis, I say that the hospitality of the future will no longer be categorized based on the classifications we use today. Classifying it by stars, by reviews, by resolution, thank you. But we will come to understand a place, a hotel, based on how many human beings they employ. I say that the luxury of the future, precisely because of the scarcity of human beings, and this is a more practical problem, but anyone who works in hospitality knows that we have a big labor problem. Shortage, we can't find staff anymore, staff leave halfway through the season and so on. But the real luxury of the future will be the awareness of a company that it could replace a human being, but consciously chooses not to and decides to employ a human instead. Precisely because of their scarcity, because of their imperfection. So I imagine just as today we buy the partisan bag.
You've touched on something that's important to me, imperfection.
No. If there is something that defines us as human beings, it's imperfection. For
me, it's imperfection. It's on imperfection that I would like to close. I would like to end on imperfection because you've touched on something important. Unintentionally, without knowing it, for me, it's my primary value. Thank you. Imperfection then.
Right? So if you're looking to reach out and talk to the most imperfect person among all the imperfect ones, just head over to simonepuorto.com. Once you're there, you will be redirected to a detailed info page, and that is where you'll find all of my contact information.
I think I've interviewed another imperfect person and
Another one.
crazy like me. I mean, guys, I don't know. I find myself in this situation. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you, Simone, for giving us your point of view. We'll see you with the next guest who will be here. Stay tuned, because in just a few seconds, right after this, a new interview will begin with speakers who are here in Calabria at Lamezia Terme during these 2 days for the Hospitality Summit, which is now in its 4th edition. Guys, 4th edition in Calabria. An amazing thing. Thank you, Bruno. Thank you, Simone, again, and see you soon.